Okay, let's just jump right into it. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're unpacking one of aviation's most terrifying, absolutely high-stakes survival stories. The date is August 23rd, 2001. What started out as a completely routine overnight flight for 306 people very quickly spiraled into a total nightmare. Today, we're going to break down exactly how a cascade of tiny, almost unnoticeable errors turned a massive commercial airliner into a 200-ton unpowered metal glider right over the middle of the ocean. So, what actually happens when a 200-ton commercial jet loses every single drop of fuel halfway across the dark Atlantic? I really want you to think about the sheer quantifiable dread of this scenario. Just imagine it. You're flying along, and suddenly that comforting, constant hum of the engines, it completely vanishes. There's no runway in sight. It's just thousands of feet of pitch black, freezing water waiting right below you. Before this night, there was literally no recorded case in commercial aviation history of a complete fuel depletion mid-flight due to a leak. No checklist, no precedent, nothing to guide a pilot through the nightmare that was about to unfold. Let's paint the picture of how this started. It's late summer, families, students, couples, they're all heading out on vacation. At 12:52 a.m., Air Transat Flight 236 takes off from Toronto, heading to Lisbon, Portugal. There are 293 passengers and 13 crew members on board. 306 souls in total. Inside the cabin, it's just this scene of peaceful ignorance, right? People are finishing up their dinners, watching movies, kids are falling asleep as the cabin lights dim. But underneath their feet, totally unknown to everyone on board, a ticking time bomb had basically just been activated. Now, to understand how we got there, we actually need to step back exactly 9 days. You know, disasters like this, they're rarely caused by just one single event. They're cascading failures. It all started when metal chips were found in the plane's right engine. The maintenance team was rushing to meet a Sunday deadline, but they didn't have an exact spare. So they swapped in a loaned older engine. But here's the kicker. A critical installation manual was stuck on an offline CD. Without it, a fatal shortcut was taken, resulting in mismatched tubes being installed. And that mismatch created a deadly vibration. Think of this mechanical issue like trying to force the wrong phone charger into your device. I mean, sure, it might look similar on the outside, and you might even be able to just jam it in there. But eventually, it's going to short circuit. The replacement engine they used was an older Rolls-Royce design, but the Airbus system was new. So the mechanics installed a new fuel tube right up against an old hydraulic tube. Just like that forced charger, they were completely incompatible. As the system pressurized flight after flight, they rubbed together until finally, the fuel tube cracked. Let's look at how this builds into absolute chaos on the night of August 24th. At 4:38 a.m., the flight data recorder notes a massive drop in fuel. But no alarm sounds in the cockpit because this specific plane lacked a direct sensor for fuel leaks. By 5:03 a.m., the pilots start noticing unusual oil readings on the right engine, which, remember, is the exact engine leaking the fuel. But they just assume it's a computer glitch. Then, at 5:33 a.m., a warning flashes. Fuel imbalance. The right wing has way less fuel than the left. The tension is definitely building, but the pilots still think they're just dealing with a manageable routine anomaly. Okay, so this brings us to the crucial point, the fatal mistake. It's honestly agonizing dramatic irony. To fix a fuel imbalance, there is a very strict checklist. If you even suspect a leak, you are supposed to follow the fuel leak procedure. But the pilots, working from memory, instead of grabbing that emergency checklist, followed the standard imbalance procedure instead. They opened the close feed valve, which is basically a pipe connecting the left and right fuel tanks. Their goal was to balance the fuel out. But remember that crack on the right side? Yeah. By opening this valve, they accidentally started pumping all their remaining, perfectly good fuel directly out of the leak into the night sky. This brings us to a staggering number, 13. At this exact point in the flight, 13 metric tons of highly flammable aviation fuel were hemorrhaging from the aircraft every single hour. And inside the cabin, 306 people were blissfully unaware that their only lifeline was quietly raining down into the Atlantic Ocean. Now here is a truly dark, honestly unbelievable coincidence. Exactly 4 years earlier, to the very day, August 24th, 1997, an Air France jet suffered an almost identical fuel leak issue. After that incident, authorities strongly recommended that Airbus install an automated fuel leak warning system, but they didn't. Airbus amended their procedures, sure, but they never actually installed the automated system. Had they done so, the pilots of Flight 236 would have immediately known they had a massive leak, instead of brushing it off as a computer glitch, and this whole nightmare might have been avoided entirely. At 5:48 a.m., finally realizing the fuel is vanishing, the pilots declare an emergency and divert toward a military base in the Azores, but it's too late. At 6:13 a.m., cruising at 34,000 feet, the right engine completely dies from fuel starvation. The pilots initiate a single-engine descent. And then, just 13 minutes later at 6:26 a.m., the left engine shuts down. That constant background hum of the aircraft, it vanishes entirely. The main electrical generators shut off, the cabin goes completely pitch black. A 200-ton passenger jet is now nothing more than a glider, and the pilots are thrust into the ultimate fight for survival. As the plane goes completely silent, let's talk about the stakes here. 144. That is the exact number of kilometers the plane was away from the Lajes Air Base runway in the Azores when it lost all power. 144 kilometers of open ocean between them and survival. There's no go-around. There's no second chance here. If they don't make it to that runway, they are going into the water. With the engines totally dead, the screens in the cockpit just go black. The only thing keeping the pilots from flying totally blind is the RAT, or ram air turbine. This tiny propeller-like device basically drops out of the bottom of the plane. It spins in the wind as the plane glides, generating just enough emergency electricity to power the most basic flight instruments and hydraulic systems. But there's a huge catch. To keep the RAT spinning, the plane has to maintain a minimum speed of 140 knots, so the pilots are literally riding the wind to stay alive. Back in the pitch-black cabin, all this data becomes painfully human. The silence was so incredibly deep that passengers actually reported their ears started ringing. Panic set in immediately. One terrified flight attendant literally ran up to a passenger, pleading, "Please help me, please help me." Teenagers remembered disaster movies and suddenly realized they were living in one. People had no idea what was happening beneath them, only that they were trapped in a silent metal tube gliding on ocean currents, bracing for the absolute worst. Up front, the captain orders preparations for a water ditching, which is a controlled emergency landing on the ocean. And the stats on this? They are terrifying. While initial impact survival is actually around 95%, overall survival drops sharply to 76%. Why? Well, because a nighttime landing in the freezing, pitch-black Atlantic with absolutely zero visibility of the wave heights is practically a death sentence due to drowning and hypothermia. The reactions inside the cabin were this incredible study in human extremes. Some passengers just accepted death, remembering documentaries about ocean crashes where planes broke apart instantly upon impact. But others, they showed this raw, incredible survival instinct. Take a passenger named Bazikas, for example. While his wife was bracing for the end, he completely refused to give up. He actually sat there in the dark, formulating a plan to exit the plane and swim to safety. He turned to his wife and calmly stated, "We will need our shoes." It's just a chilling yet deeply inspiring moment of pure resilience in the face of certain doom. For 19 terrifying minutes, the plane glides. To this day, this remains the longest powerless glide of a commercial passenger jet in aviation history. But you have to understand, this wasn't just gracefully falling. It was a high-stakes tightrope walk. Captain Pichet and First Officer de Jager had to perfectly calculate their descent rate, manually fighting the heavy, unpowered flight controls and constantly trading altitude for speed just to coax this massive machine toward a tiny speck of land in the ocean. One slight miscalculation meant hitting the water. Miraculously, at 6:45 a.m., they reached the Azores. But an unpowered landing is violent. With absolutely no engine reverse thrust to slow the plane down, Flight 236 slams into the tarmac at an extreme speed. The pilots stand on the brakes with everything they have. Tires explode right down to the metal bearings, shooting sparks and flames everywhere. When they finally screech to a halt, the cabin erupts. The crew immediately initiates an emergency evacuation, and they manage to get every single person out on the slides in under 2 minutes. Which brings us to arguably the most incredible statistic in this entire story: 0. Despite the cascading mechanical errors, the missing manual, the mismatched tubes, the fatal pilot error opening the valve, and that absolutely terrifying 19-minute powerless glide, there were exactly 0 casualties among the 306 people on board. It was an absolute masterclass in high-stakes survival. But, as with any great story, there's a twist. And the aftermath of Flight 236 is fascinating. Captain Robert Pichet was rightfully hailed as an absolute hero. However, Just days later, a media firestorm erupted when it was revealed that the captain was a pardoned ex-drug smuggler who had actually served prison time in Georgia 20 years prior. It just added this wild, unexpected layer of complexity to the man who saved 306 lives. Meanwhile, the consequences for the airline were severe. Air Transat was hit with a $250,000 fine, which was the largest in Canadian aviation history at the time, along with a $30 million class action lawsuit from passengers who suffered severe, lasting trauma. So, we'll wrap up the explainer today with this final thought. When a near-fatal disaster requires a dozen overlapping failures to occur, a missing offline CD, an untested mechanical shortcut, an ignored warning system, and a simple memory lapse on a checklist, isn't it an absolute miracle that the sheer survival instinct and piloting skills of the crew were enough to counter them all? It really leaves you wondering just how fragile the technology we rely on every single day really is, and how incredibly thin the line is between catastrophic failure and miraculous human survival. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope it sparked your curiosity, and